The main theme of the story: an alien woman, seeking shelter from a forest storm, unexpectedly encounters a human in their home. Rain hammered the forest with the kind of enthusiasm normally reserved for interstellar percussion concerts, each drop drumming against leaves and rocks as if the world itself had decided to audition for a cosmic orchestra. The alien woman dashed through the underbrush, her long ears twitching like twin radar dishes, catching the subtle squeaks of branches bending underwater and the occasional startled croak of a frog that clearly had better things to do than be soaked tonight. Her silver hair whipped around her face, plastering itself against pale skin, and she swore softly in a language that sounded like wind chimes caught in a hurricane. She landed on this planet weeks ago with the intention of a quiet survey, a routine reconnaissance mission with minimal human interaction, but evidently she had failed to account for Earth's chaotic meteorology. Seriously, she muttered to herself, dodging a puddle that, if it had a personality, would have laughed at her. They tell me humans are primitive, but their weather is a war machine. Branches grabbed at her coat like tiny green hands trying to drag her back into the forest's embrace, and she rolled under a low-hanging bough with the grace of someone who could pivot in zero gravity, landing in a puddle with a comic squelch. Her ears twitched. Note to self: bring a better coat next time, or a starship. Lightning streaked across the sky in a brilliant zigzag, illuminating her figure as she scrambled toward the dim glow of a small cabin. The sight of it, nestled like a reluctant guardian among drenched ferns and twisted roots, made her think of her own floating city, suspended over magnetic currents and glimmering like a jewel in the night sky. Humans really know how to pick hideaways, she quipped aloud, stepping cautiously onto the porch, slipping once and almost face-planting. Or maybe I just have a knack for dramatic entrances. The door swung open before she could even knock. Well, she didn't plan to knock anyway, soaking as she was, and the rain had already turned her into a walking puddle of cosmic misfortune. A human stood frozen on the threshold, holding a mug like it contained some sacred elixir rather than lukewarm tea, eyes wide enough to hold a storm of their own. He might have screamed, but instead he simply blinked repeatedly, and in that moment she had a brief, horrifying thought. Were all humans so easily stunned by the sight of a long-eared extraterrestrial? She tried to say something polite, a greeting in her melodic tongue, but all that came out was a choking sound vaguely resembling a hiccup, which, judging by the human's expression, only added to the spectacle. "You are," he began, trailing off, his voice pitching as though he might actually sprain himself mid-sentence. She raised a hand in what she hoped passed for a peaceful gesture, water dripping off the tips of her fingers like tiny luminous droplets that caught the faint glow of the interior. "Greetings, Earthling, I apologize for the water intrusion. Your abode seemed inviting." She had practiced this line in her head a dozen times, but somehow it sounded like she was reading from an intergalactic shopping list, which made the human tilt his head, muttering something about an interstellar realtor. She blinked. "Excuse me." "You heard me," he said, cautiously stepping back so she could enter without tripping over the threshold. "You, need to dry off, or well, not drown, that works too." He sounded like he was negotiating with a very confused rainstorm rather than a sentient being from beyond the stars. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood, overcooked noodles, and a faint tang of the pine forest. She twitched her ears as she stepped over a rug that seemed intent on sliding out from under her. "Primitive flooring," she remarked, almost in awe of its audacity to remain flat while she stomped across it. "No magnetic stabilization. You humans live dangerously." The human Alex, she learned his name eventually, after he introduced himself in a voice that sounded like it was always halfway between fear and excitement, grinned nervously, holding up his mug again. "And yet somehow we survive, mostly." She laughed, a sound that rippled like a crystal bell in the cabin. "Mostly," she echoed, "your survival rate must be impressive then." She shook her hair, sending a spray of droplets across the room, and Alex yelped as some hit his tea. "Definitely adds excitement," he said, glaring at his mug like it had betrayed him. The alien raised an eyebrow, which for her species was a subtle, artful arch of facial muscles that carried more nuance than most humans could process in a single glance. "I see your sense of humor has not been entirely lost in your primitive evolutionary process," she said. Yeah," he said, Mostly depends on how you define humor and evolution and T fidelity. He trailed off, realizing that the sentence made less sense than a starship without gravity generators. She tilted her head, long ears fanning out like radar arrays. Fascinating, your humor is illogical, yet somehow effective. She paused, scanning the room as if taking a mental photograph of every absurd object. Books stacked precariously, a lamp with a shade that appeared to have survived 3 different domestic wars, and a small robotic vacuum that buzzed in the corner, clearly terrified of her presence. "What is this tiny predator?" she asked, pointing at the vacuum. Alex's grin broadened, the first real sign of comfort since her arrival. "Ah, that's Roomba, it attacks dust. Occasionally it attacks feet, furniture, and sanity." She crouched slightly, observing the vacuum as it spun in tight circles, bumping ineffectively into the base of a chair. "Ah, your technology has domestic combat applications. Interesting, very earthling." She straightened and flicked a hand toward the window, gesturing at the still pouring rain. "Your atmosphere is hostile, your precipitation relentless, yet you humans endure. Impressive." Alex laughed, a nervous, awkward sound that made her ears twitch with amusement. "Yeah, we endure, mostly, unless someone from space shows up and critiques our furniture choices." She laughed again, this time a little louder, letting her shoulders shake. "I did not intend to critique, merely observe and survive." She paused, considering the human who was watching her with a mix of fascination and mild terror. "You," she said, pointing at him, "are not what I expected." Alex raised an eyebrow. "I hope that's a good thing, or at least not a death sentence." "Good, definitely not a death sentence," she assured him, "unless the rain changes allegiance. But I have noticed you make tea, which suggests intelligence and risk management. Favorable traits." "Right," he said, trying to sound casual while silently hoping she didn't have the ability to assess the human lifespan with a glance. "So would you like some tea, maybe a towel first?" She considered it, her ears twitching in thought. "Tea, yes, towel perhaps after I have negotiated peace with the puddles on my coat." She glanced down at herself, water dripping from every conceivable surface. "I have arrived, fully hydrated," she added, as if that made the situation any less ridiculous. Alex snorted. "Fully hydrated, right? Good, that's practical." And so, the first night began with laughter echoing in the cabin alongside the storm, an alien and a human learning that the universe could be terrifying, but also ridiculously funny if you were willing to embrace the absurdity. And maybe, just maybe, share a cup of tea before the puddles staged a revolt. The next morning, the alien woman awoke to the faint scent of burnt toast and the rhythmic tapping of rain still clinging to the roof, though now it fell with a tired sort of persistence rather than the furious percussion of the previous night. She stretched, ears twitching in a way that made Alex, who had been hovering near the kitchen doorway with a mug of coffee as if it were a fragile relic, almost spill the liquid. "Do those twitching appendages indicate alertness or amusement?" he asked cautiously, stepping back. "Both," she said, letting her long ears sweep forward and backward in a curious rhythm, "though your smell of roasted grains is quite comforting." She padded into the kitchen, careful not to make puddles on the hardwood floor, though the effort only produced a small slip that made her mutter something about Earth gravity being underqualified for professional standing. Alex couldn't help laughing, because yes, Earth gravity might have been the least competent thing she'd encountered so far, which was saying a lot considering interdimensional starship docking protocols. She peered at the appliances like they were alien artifacts worthy of a museum exhibit. The toaster, simple and unassuming, commanded her attention. "So, this is your heat-based sustenance projector?" she asked, poking at it cautiously with the tip of her finger. Sparks of electricity jumped in tiny arcs, making her twitch ears quiver in delight. "It is alive." Alex chuckled, "Not alive, mostly harmless. It only attacks when you ignore the crumb tray." He tilted the toaster with one hand, demonstrating the threat level while keeping his other hand on his mug for moral support. "See? No teeth, no claws, just a bit of fire." The alien leaned closer, inspecting it as if it were a creature she might find in the floating jungles of her home world. "Curious," she murmured. "Primitive yet functional, I like this species already." She straightened, ears flicking, and glanced at Alex, who was cautiously smiling as he realized she might be developing a taste for Earth humor after all. Breakfast became a dance of tentative camaraderie. She attempted to pour coffee, watching it rise in the mug with an intensity that made Alex nervous. Careful, he warned. That stuff is mostly water, but it's sacred. She frowned. Water, ha. That is the commonality of your planet that baffles me. You worship the mundane. Fascinating. She sipped carefully, grimacing at the bitter taste. This is liquid punishment. Nope, Alex said, grimacing back at the dark roast himself. It's just called coffee. Mostly it makes you jittery and talk too much, which, judging by your species' auditory range, could be catastrophic. She considered this, one long ear twitching thoughtfully, before shoving the mug into her hands again and whispering conspiratorially, I shall conquer this bitter potion. It may take millennia. After breakfast, they moved into a more practical exploration of each other's worlds. Alex showed her the television, which she regarded with wide-eyed curiosity, marveling at the concept of moving images stored and broadcast by invisible waves. This device, she said, touching the screen lightly, holds stories, images, and sounds, but it cannot transport matter. Alex laughed a little awkwardly. Nope, just entertainment, mostly ridiculous arguments in tiny boxes. Sometimes explosions, though. Her ears flicked and she laughed softly, the sound like wind chimes caught in a gentle gale. Explosions, the universal language of drama. I like this species more and more. She leaned against the couch, letting her long legs stretch, considering the human with quiet amusement. You live so simply, yet so hilariously. I have starships with more safety protocols than your daily life. And yet here you survive, barely. He raised an eyebrow, barely, mostly. They ventured outside after the rain ceased, stepping carefully over puddles that reflected the broken light of a sun still partially obscured by clouds. She marveled at the way raindrops lingered, creating tiny, chaotic mirrors. Your planet is wet, she said, kicking a small puddle to watch it ripple. And yet you humans behave as if it is normal. My people would require a dozen protective fields and a hydrophobic suit to survive such moist chaos. Alex smirked, holding a small umbrella over both of them out of politeness and practicality. We're a hardy breed. Or maybe we're just stubborn, could be both. Her ears twitched, the tips brushing against his arm as they walked. She hesitated, then asked, Tell me, human, do you ever wonder about the stars beyond your reach? Those points of light, do they seem like possibilities or prisons? Alex considered it, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Mostly possibilities, sometimes prisons, depends on the day. Why? Because your species intrigues me, she said. You see humor and survival in the mundane, in danger. You make tea and sandwiches with equal devotion. You fear small robots yet wander the forest in storms. This is remarkable. He laughed. I suppose that's one way to look at it. And you run through storms, get soaked, and critique furniture. That's remarkable too. She tilted her head, long ears fanning like sails. Ah, so humor is mutual. Excellent. Then perhaps we can coexist for longer than a single rainfall. Back in the cabin, they attempted an interstellar exchange of stories. She described floating cities where gravity was a suggestion rather than a rule, where traffic jams involved vehicles that glided above magnetic winds, and where creatures with translucent skin communicated in bioluminescent patterns. Alex, in turn, described the peculiarities of Earth, the obsession with breakfast cereals, the competitive chaos of grocery stores, and the absurd notion of reality shows. They laughed over mismatched comparisons, like whether a floating city's market chaos could rival the human tradition of a Black Friday sale, and discovered an unexpected symmetry in their fascination with each other's worlds. At one point, she attempted a joke in her alien tongue, carefully translated into English with a flourish. Why do humans look at the stars before breakfast? She asked, flicking her ears like a question mark. Because they cannot afford the calories of their own curiosity. Alex groaned, but the corners of his mouth twitched into a reluctant smile. All right, maybe your species does have a sense of humor, a weird one but acceptable. Evening fell and the forest outside turned dark again, but the cabin glowed with warm light, filled with the sounds of laughter, sips of poorly brewed coffee, and the occasional exasperated groan at alien puns. The alien woman, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her ears resting lazily against the couch, considered Alex, who was trying to demonstrate the correct technique for flipping pancakes without breaking them. Your species is chaotic, she said, voice tinged with fond amusement, yet delightful. Alex grinned, attempting a final, heroic pancake flip that landed slightly sideways. We try, mostly we fail. But hey, it's all part of the experience. Her ears twitched in agreement. Then perhaps, she said, this will be the beginning of an enjoyable experiment. And so, the alien woman and the human continued their tentative exploration of each other's worlds, discovering that the universe could be vast, bewildering, and dangerous, but also unexpectedly funny when shared over burnt toast, puddle reflections, and poorly executed pancake flips. The sun rose over the forest with the kind of understated dignity only Earth could manage, painting the wet leaves in a spectrum of gold and silver that made the alien woman pause mid-step. Her long ears twitched as if to catch the language of the sunlight, and for a moment she simply stood, marveling at the way water refracted light into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Alex appeared beside her, holding 2 mugs of steaming coffee that smelled less like interstellar mystery and more like breakfast survival. I figured we could watch the sunrise, he said, fumbling with the mugs. One wobbled precariously and she flicked her ears in mock alarm. Delicate human contraptions, you survive storms and yet fear a mug tipping. Fascinating. He laughed, handing her the mug anyway. It's not fear, it's anticipation. You never know when a coffee betrayal will occur. She sipped carefully, her face contorting at the bitter taste, and then something odd happened. She laughed, a soft, musical sound that rippled through the cabin. Yes, she said, betrayal is universal, even in liquid form. They spent the morning planning a careful foray into the forest, inspecting puddles and soggy leaves as though preparing for a diplomatic mission on a hostile planet. She showed him a technique for detecting the residual energy of rainfall on leaves, which she explained could indicate recent atmospheric disturbances. Alex, who had never thought about leaves in any capacity beyond their seasonal inconvenience, attempted to mimic her motions, resulting in a tumble that sent him into a small mud puddle. She gasped, then laughed until tears pricked the corners of her eyes. Your species is remarkably resilient, and your coordination questionable. Mostly, Alex said, spitting out a mouthful of mud with comedic precision. Mostly resilient, mostly coordinated. She shook her head, her ears flicking, marveling at his irrepressible humor. I begin to understand why you survive your planet's hostility. Humor is your armor and ridiculousness your shield. By midday, the sun had burned through the clouds, leaving the forest glistening like a living gemstone. They walked among the puddles, and she pointed out tiny patterns in the water, reflections that shifted with the angle of the sun, explaining how her people used similar patterns to navigate magnetic currents on their floating cities. Alex nodded sagely, though mostly he was distracted by the fact that her ears occasionally dipped into the puddles like antennae seeking hidden signals. Are they sensory? He asked. Partly, she said, partly expressive. They are both map and mood, communication and curiosity. She twitched them in a subtle pattern and he realized he was reading some of her thoughts without needing words. This is unnerving, but oddly charming. She laughed at his expression, and they continued walking, noticing the patterns of light and shadow, sharing the quiet humor of slipping on wet stones and narrowly avoiding tree roots that seemed to laugh at them. Back at the cabin, they prepared a meal together. She attempted to cook, using gestures that manipulated heat and energy in ways that defied conventional physics. Alex, trying to follow her instructions, produced a dish that looked like it had survived a minor volcanic eruption. She tasted it carefully and her ears twitched in a satisfied rhythm. Edible, she announced, though perhaps a seasoning less combustive would enhance the experience. Alex grinned, proud of the small victory, mostly edible, mostly safe. We'll call it a success. As evening fell, the alien woman and Alex sat on the porch, watching the forest settle into a quiet lull. She spoke of her home world again, describing creatures that communicated through bioluminescence and cities suspended above magnetic winds, yet her words carried a new weight. She had seen something in this human, a resilience, a capacity for laughter, a willingness to share mundane spaces with the unfamiliar, that had subtly shifted her perception of survival and diplomacy. I have traveled far, she said softly, yet never encountered a species so unexpectedly remarkable in its simplicity. Alex laughed. Unexpectedly remarkable, huh? That's one for the record books, mostly accurate. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as fireflies emerged, blinking in patterns that mirrored her home planet's communication lights. She reached out, tentatively brushing her fingers against his hand, a gesture of trust and connection she had not offered easily. This is different, she said. I expected caution, observation, perhaps curiosity, but not this, not comfort in your presence. Alex squeezed her hand gently. Humans are weird like that. Mostly cautious, sometimes ridiculous, occasionally brave. You just happen to fall into the last category. She twitched her ears in amusement at the pun she barely understood but appreciated nonetheless. As the night deepened, she realized that her journey had transformed her understanding of first contact, diplomacy, and companionship. Survival was no longer simply about avoiding danger. It was about sharing the absurdity of existence, learning to laugh at unexpected moments, and finding resonance in unlikely alliances. Alex, too, had grown, recognizing the vastness of the universe through the lens of one remarkable alien who could make him question gravity, humor, and his own assumptions about life beyond Earth. A gentle rain began again, pattering softly against the roof, but this time it felt like music, not a threat. She leaned back, ears resting lightly on the railing, and smiled at Alex. Perhaps, she said, the universe is less frightening when shared with someone who laughs at the same absurdities. Alex nodded, mostly less frightening, mostly hilarious, and you. I agree, she said, her voice carrying a warmth she had not expected to feel outside her own starship corridors. Mostly hilarious, mostly safe, and mostly enjoyable. They watched the rain together, the forest around them alive with quiet wonder, the cabin glowing like a beacon of improbable connection. In that simple, absurd, utterly human moment, both realized that the journey had not only brought them together, it had changed them. She had learned the value of humor, patience, and the unexpected joys of simplicity. He had glimpsed the vastness of the universe through a lens of curiosity, wonder, and the kind of trust that comes from sharing one's world with someone utterly different. The rain subsided. Stars appeared overhead, mirrored faintly in the puddles below. She stood, ears flicking toward the sky, and whispered, "Perhaps it is time I return to the stars." Alex tilted his head, pretending to look offended. Mostly dramatic, mostly predictable, but mostly understandable. She laughed softly, leaning toward him one last time before she turned to the forest, feeling the subtle tug of home and the undeniable pull of this small human place. Farewell for now, she said, and thank you for teaching me that the universe can be unexpectedly delightful. Alex waved.